The date is July 31st, 1969. The air in the Nevada desert is thick with electricity, a shimmering heat that has nothing to do with the sun. Inside the cavernous showroom of the Las Vegas International Hotel, a god is about to be reborn. He is a phantom, a whisper from the past, a celluloid hero from a string of forgettable films. But tonight, he is flesh and blood. He is nervous. He is terrified. He is Elvis Presley. He stands behind the curtain, a black-clad panther in the darkness, listening to the roar of a crowd that hasn't truly seen him in nearly a decade. The sound is a tidal wave of expectation. They remember the boy who shook the world from the waist down. They have no idea who stands there now. In that moment, he was the highest-paid entertainer in the history of Las Vegas. He was also a prisoner, standing on the edge of his own execution. The contract that was about to resurrect his career was a death warrant, signed in invisible ink, and he was the one holding the pen. To understand how the city of second chances became his velvet-lined coffin, we must go back to the silence, the years before Vegas, the wilderness. After the army, Hollywood had swallowed him whole, repackaging his lightning-in-a-bottle rebellion into a safe, family-friendly commodity. The king of rock and roll had become a singing tour guide, a pineapple-loving beach boy, a race car driver with a guitar. The music, once a primal scream of liberation, was now a predictable, sterile whisper. He was rich, he was famous, he was suffocating. Each film was another bar on the cage, each soundtrack another nail in the coffin of his artistic soul. He watched from his gilded prison in Bel Air as the world he created moved on without him. The Beatles, the Stones, Dylan. A musical revolution was raging, and its original king was AWOL, lost in a technicolor purgatory, orchestrated by his enigmatic manager, Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel, a carnival barker in a businessman's suit, had a simple philosophy. An easy dollar was better than a hard-earned one. And movies were easy. But then came 1968, a chance at redemption, disguised as a television Christmas special. The network wanted sleigh bells and sweaters. Elvis, for the first time in years, wanted fire. Pushed by a rebellious director, he shed the Hollywood skin. Clad head to toe in black leather, he was raw, dangerous, and dripping with a charisma that had been dormant for too long. It wasn't a concert. It was an exorcism. He wasn't just singing his old hits. He was reclaiming them, tearing them down to their studs, and rebuilding them with the raw fury of a man who had been silenced. The Parachurse 68 Comeback Special was a critical and commercial atom bomb. It proved one thing beyond any doubt. The king was not dead. The world was his for the taking once more. Touring offers flooded in from every corner of the globe. London, Tokyo, Paris, places he had only dreamed of playing. It was his moment to break free, to become the global icon he was always meant to be. But the Colonel had other plans. Parker, a man with no legal passport and a past shrouded in mystery, could never leave the United States. And if the Colonel couldn't go global, neither could Elvis. Instead, Parker saw a different kind of gold mine, a place where the audience came to you, where the machinery of profit could be controlled down to the last cent. A glittering mirage in the desert. Las Vegas, the International Hotel, the largest in the world at the time, made an offer that was staggering. It wasn't just a concert, it was a residency, a 4-week engagement, 2 shows a night, a guaranteed fortune. To Elvis, it sounded like a coronation, a month-long victory lap after his triumphant return. He had no idea he wasn't just signing up for a month. He was about to sign away the rest of his life. That first night, the showroom felt less like a venue and more like a Roman Colosseum. The weight of his own legend was a physical pressure. He opened with blue suede shoes, his body tight, his movements tentative. For the first few songs, he was a man walking a tightrope over a canyon of his own past. The audience watched, holding its collective breath. Was the fire from the 68 special real, or just a trick of the television cameras? Then, something snapped. During a performance of All Shook Up, a woman screamed from the front row, a sound of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. It was the spark. A jolt went through him, a current connecting him to the raw energy he had been missing for a decade. The stiffness melted away. The tentative movements became explosive. The polite smile became a feral sneer. He was no longer a man performing songs. He was the songs themselves. He commanded the stage with a power no one had seen before. He was a conductor of chaos, backed by the sonic boom of the TCB band and the grandeur of a full orchestra. He lunged, he kicked, he dropped to his knee, pouring every ounce of his being into every note. By the end of the show, with a soul-shattering rendition of Suspicious Minds, he wasn't just back. He was bigger than he had ever been. He had conquered Las Vegas. The press called it the greatest comeback in the history of entertainment. In the afterglow of that monumental success, while the champagne flowed and the flashbulbs popped, the Colonel made his move. In a quiet corner of a coffee shop, with hotel owner Kirk Kerkorian, a deal was struck. Not by a team of high-powered lawyers, but by two men on a single tablecloth. The Colonel, ever the carny, sketched out the terms. 5 years, 30 days, twice a year, an astronomical sum. It was the deal of the century. Elvis, high on the adrenaline of his victory and trusting the man who had guided his career from the beginning, agreed without hesitation. The ink on that tablecloth wasn't yet dry when the nature of the cage began to reveal itself. The penthouse suite, a sprawling palace of gold fixtures and deep crimson carpets floating 30 stories above the neon hum of the Strip, became less a home and more an exquisitely decorated isolation chamber. He was sealed off from the world. Day was night, night was day. He would sleep until the late afternoon, woken by his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, to prepare for the first show. After the dinner show, a brief respite. Then back on stage for the midnight show, a performance for the high rollers, the gamblers, the true creatures of the Vegas night. He wouldn't get back to his suite until 3 or 4 in the morning, his body thrumming with an artificial energy that refused to let him sleep. He was an engine that was never allowed to cool down. The initial thrill of victory quickly began to curdle into the grim reality of routine. It was a grind, a relentless, soul-crushing grind. The city that had crowned him was now consuming him. He was no longer a creative force. He was an attraction, a human slot machine that was guaranteed to pay out every single night, twice a night. He was the most famous, most beloved, most well-paid prisoner in the world, but a prisoner nonetheless. And as the weeks turned into months, and the months into years, the prisoner began to look for a way to escape his own performance. He found it in a rebellion not of politics or protest, but of pure, unadulterated performance. A rebellion that would thrill his fans and terrify his keepers. The repetition was a form of madness. The same city, the same suite, the same showroom, the same songs, night after night. To keep his sanity, Elvis began to wage a war against his own act. The stage became his only territory of freedom, and he would not be contained within it. The tightly choreographed superstar of that first engagement began to unravel, replaced by something far more unpredictable, and, to many, far more fascinating. He started talking to the audience, not just polite thank yous, but long, stream-of-consciousness monologues. He would tell stories about his childhood, joke with his bandmates, muse about philosophy, and rail against bad press reviews he'd read that day. The carefully timed 60-minute show ballooned into an 80-minute, sometimes 2-hour epic of music and madness. For the fans, it was intoxicating. They were getting a glimpse behind the curtain, a raw, unfiltered connection to their idol. For the hotel management, who had to clear the room for the next set of gamblers, it was a nightmare. Then came the karate. His longtime passion for martial arts, once a private discipline, exploded onto the stage. He transformed his classic songs into violent ballets. Suspicious Minds no longer ended with a flourish. It ended with a dizzying series of high kicks, lunges, and mock battles with imaginary foes. He would split his pants, lose his breath, and push his body to the absolute limit. It was a stunning physical spectacle. A man in his late 30s moving with the ferocity of a heavyweight fighter. But it was also a cry for help, a physical manifestation of his internal war against the crushing boredom. He began to play with the lyrics, twisting the sacred texts of his own legacy. The earnest ballad, "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" was sometimes delivered with a straight face, and other times transformed into a bizarre comedy routine. He'd change the lyrics to inside jokes, crack up laughing during the spoken word part, and turn a moment of high drama into pure farce. It was sabotage from the inside. If he had to sing the song for the 1,000th time, he was going to do it on his own terms. But this on-stage rebellion was only possible because of a darker, more insidious coping mechanism happening off-stage. The impossible schedule, sleeping all day, performing all night, had shattered his natural body clock. To force his body to sleep after the high of a midnight show, he took sleeping pills. To force it to wake up in the afternoon, he took stimulants. To kill the aches and pains from the nightly karate battles, he took painkillers. To manage his mood, he took antidepressants. A quiet, doctor-prescribed chemical war was being waged inside him. A war to keep the machine running. Dr. George Nikopoulos, Drive Nick, became a permanent fixture of the entourage. His job was simple: to keep Elvis Presley functional enough to walk on that stage every night, whatever it took. The prescriptions were not a secret indulgence. They were a tool of the trade, as essential as the jumpsuits and the microphone. They were the fuel that allowed the king to continue his nightly reign, but it was a corrosive fuel that was burning him out from the inside. The colonel saw the onstage chaos and the growing pill dependency not as a warning sign, but as a management problem. He didn't see a man in pain. He saw a product becoming unreliable. The spontaneity that thrilled the crowds was a liability to the bottom line. He wanted the predictable Elvis, the 60-minute hit machine. He began to apply pressure, sending notes backstage, demanding Elvis stick to the script. But he was trying to cage a hurricane. Elvis, feeling the walls of his gilded prison closing in, was about to push back in a way that would threaten to bring the entire empire crashing down. The king was about to declare war on his own court jester. To understand the colonel's tightening grip, one must understand his own trap. Las Vegas was not just a gold mine for Elvis. It was a sanctuary and a prison for Parker himself. The colonel, born Andreas Cornelis van Kuijk in the Netherlands, was an illegal immigrant. He had no passport, no legal identity beyond the one he had fabricated. Leaving the United States would mean facing a past he had spent a lifetime burying. The world tours Elvis dreamed of were an impossibility for him. Vegas was the perfect solution. A stationary cash machine in a country he could not leave. But there was a darker secret. The colonel was a degenerate gambler. While Elvis was upstairs in the penthouse, Parker was downstairs in the casino, sometimes for days on end. He would lose fortunes at the roulette and baccarat tables of the International, racking up millions in debt. His debt, however, was his leverage. He would simply work it off by signing Elvis up for another year, another extension, another series of shows. Elvis Presley's career was no longer a path to glory. It was collateral against his manager's massive gambling losses. This desperation fueled his tyranny. He needed Elvis on that stage, compliant and predictable. The onstage monologues, the extended song versions, the wild karate displays, they were all threats to the smoothly running operation. He began sending terse notes backstage, delivered by members of the Memphis Mafia. Too much talking. Stick to the hits. Cut the karate. To Elvis, these were not suggestions. They were orders from a man he increasingly saw as a warden, not a manager. The tension backstage became a thick, suffocating fog. The system built around Elvis was designed for one purpose: to perpetuate the performances. His health, his happiness, his sanity, they were all secondary concerns. Dr. Nick's role became even more crucial. He was the official medical authority who could assure the hotel and the colonel that Elvis was fit to perform, even when he clearly wasn't. A cocktail of pills could get him through a show, prop him up when he was exhausted, and bring him down when he was wired. He was no longer just an artist. He was a medical marvel of endurance, kept upright by a carefully calibrated chemical scaffold. The conflict came to a head in September 1973. Elvis, sick with pneumonia and exhausted from the relentless schedule, missed a few shows. The hotel was unhappy. The colonel was furious. But the breaking point came over something seemingly trivial. During a show at the Las Vegas Hilton, Elvis gave a heartfelt thank you to the hotel's staff, including a man who had just been fired. After the show, the colonel stormed into his dressing room, incandescent with rage. He berated Elvis for his lack of professionalism, for mentioning a fired employee, for his unpredictable behavior. For Elvis, it was the final indignity. After years of grinding out performances, of sacrificing his health and his art, to be chastised like a disobedient child over something so minor, something inside him broke. He stood up, his voice dangerously low. He told the colonel their relationship was over. He was fired. The words hung in the air, electric and unbelievable. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Elvis Presley had cut the puppet strings. He was free, or so he thought. He had just made a move against the most cunning manipulator in the business, and the colonel's response would be swift, brutal, and designed to prove one thing: no one escapes the colonel's carnival. The firing of Colonel Tom Parker was a seismic event. The Memphis Mafia was stunned. For 2 decades, Parker had been the immovable object, the architect of every success, the gatekeeper of the Elvis empire. To imagine Elvis without the colonel was like imagining a planet without gravity. In the immediate aftermath, Elvis felt a surge of pure, liberating power. He was his own man. He spoke excitedly with his father, Vernon, about the future, world tours, serious film roles, a new recording contract. The possibilities seemed endless. But the Colonel was a master of psychological warfare. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply agreed. And then he presented his bill. He began meticulously itemizing every single expense he had ever covered over 20 years. Every hotel room, every plane ticket, every piece of promotion, every favor called in. He calculated the cost of breaking the contract with the Hilton, the cost of buying out his own lifelong management percentage. The numbers were astronomical. A mountain of debt so high it was designed to be unscalable. The bill was not a financial document. It was a weapon. It was a ransom note for Elvis's entire life and legacy. Vernon Presley, a man cautious with money to a fault, was horrified. He saw the family fortune, everything they had worked for, evaporating. He saw bankruptcy, ruin. He went to Elvis, the Colonel's terrifying bill in hand, and pleaded with him. He explained that they couldn't afford this. They couldn't survive this. The Colonel had them trapped. The web, spun over 2 decades, was too intricate, too strong. To break free would mean financial suicide. The exhilarating feeling of freedom evaporated, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of defeat. Elvis realized the truth. The Colonel wasn't just his manager. He was his entire infrastructure. His jailer was also his lifeline. The choice was brutally simple: financial ruin and a chaotic, uncertain freedom, or a return to the gilded cage with the devil he knew. It was a choice that wasn't a choice at all. Beaten, humiliated, and utterly trapped, Elvis was forced to relent. He went back to the Colonel. The rebellion was over. The surrender was absolute. Something inside him shattered that day. The flicker of fight, the rebellious spark that had fueled his onstage antics, was extinguished. When he returned to the stage, the performance was different. The wild, unpredictable energy was gone, replaced by a weary professionalism. The monologues became shorter, the karate moves more perfunctory. He was a man going through the motions, a ghost haunting his own stage. The surrender off stage had translated into a surrender on stage. The defeat accelerated his physical and mental decline. His dependency on prescription drugs deepened, no longer just a tool to manage a schedule, but a balm to numb the pain of his capitulation. He felt powerless, and the drugs offered a fleeting illusion of control, a chemical escape from a reality he could no longer bear. He had stared into the abyss of true freedom and been forced to retreat. Now, there was nowhere left to run. The velvet coffin had him, and its lid was slowly, inexorably, beginning to close. But before the final darkness, there was one terrifying incident in that Vegas suite. A moment of paranoia and despair that revealed just how far the king had truly fallen. The surrender to the Colonel marked the beginning of the final, tragic chapter of his Las Vegas saga. The fight had gone out of him, and in its place, a profound weariness took root. His body, once a symbol of youthful rebellion, became a battlefield. The punishing schedule, the lack of proper rest, the poor diet, and the escalating cocktail of prescription medications began to take a visible and devastating toll. He gained weight, his face grew puffy, his movements became sluggish. The iconic jumpsuits, once designed to showcase a lean, predatory physique, were now engineered to conceal a bloated, ailing body. They became more ornate, more spectacular, laden with jewels and capes, a dazzling costume to distract from the decaying man inside. The performances became tragically unpredictable. On some nights, a flash of the old brilliance would shine through, and he would electrify the audience with the sheer power of his voice and charisma. But on other nights, he was a shadow of his former self. He would stumble through songs, forget lyrics, his speech slurred and thick. The band would watch him intently, ready to cover for a missed cue or a forgotten verse. The audience, once there to witness a resurrection, was now a mix of devoted fans willing to forgive anything and morbid curiosity seekers waiting for a potential train wreck. His isolation in the penthouse suite intensified. He became a nocturnal creature, surrounded only by his paid entourage and his escalating paranoia. He would watch multiple television sets at once, a habit he'd had for years, but now it felt different. A desperate attempt to drown out the silence, to feel connected to a world he could no longer truly inhabit. It was in this state of drug-fueled isolation and paranoia that one of the most disturbing incidents of his life occurred. Robert Goulet, another popular singer, was appearing on a local talk show on one of the TVs. For reasons known only to his fractured psyche, Elvis became fixated on the singer. A paranoid delusion took hold. Perhaps a perceived slight, a joke he misinterpreted, or a simple, irrational dislike. Whatever the trigger, the result was volcanic. He pulled out one of the many handguns he kept in the suite and fired it directly into the television screen, obliterating Goulet's smiling image in a shower of sparks and shattered glass. The members of the Memphis Mafia who witnessed it were frozen in shock. This was not the playful, mischievous Elvis they knew. This was a man unmoored from reality, a king in a padded cell of his own making, whose rage and despair could only be expressed through an act of senseless, violent destruction. The bullet that shattered that television screen was a metaphor for his own shattered spirit. He was firing at a phantom on a screen, but the real target was his own life, his own prison. The incident was quickly covered up, the television replaced, the story buried. The show, as always, had to go on, but the mask of the entertainer was slipping, revealing the tormented man underneath. The nightly ritual of self-parody continued. He would sweat, he would sing, he would hand out scarves to weeping women in the front row, a hollow imitation of the connection he once felt. Each performance chipped away another piece of his soul. Las Vegas was no longer his kingdom. It was his mausoleum, and he was forced to perform nightly at his own wake. The final curtain was falling, not with a dramatic bang, but with a long, drawn-out, and heartbreaking fade to black. The final years in Las Vegas were a blur of diminishing returns. The engagements at the Hilton became the twin pillars of his year, the grueling obligations around which the rest of his life revolved. By 1976, the decay was undeniable. He would often perform seated in a chair, his breath short, his body struggling to support the weight of both his physical being and his own legend. The karate moves were gone, replaced by a weary wave of the hand. The powerful baritone was still there, but it was often clouded by medication, a beautiful instrument trapped in a broken case. The city itself had changed around him. The Rat Pack glamour was gone, replaced by a more corporate, less personal entertainment machine. Elvis, once the revolutionary who brought rock and roll to the Strip, was now an institution, a piece of the city's furniture, a monument that people came to see. He was trapped in an endless loop of his own past, singing songs of youthful rebellion to audiences of middle-aged tourists. The irony was suffocating. His final Las Vegas engagement was in December of 1976. By this point, his health was in a catastrophic state. His father and the colonel had to practically carry him to the plane to get him there. The shows were a struggle. On some nights, he was lucid and brilliant, reminding everyone of the God that still lived within the ruins. On other nights, he was barely present. His final performance on that stage, on December 12, 1976, was not marked by any special ceremony. It was just another show, the end of another run. No one knew it would be the last time. He walked off that stage, left the Hilton, and never returned. He had performed over 600 shows in that showroom, over 600 sold-out crowds. He had redefined the concept of a Las Vegas residency and set a standard of success that remains unparalleled. He had earned hundreds of millions of dollars, and it had cost him everything. Vegas provided the perfect environment for his self-destruction. The isolation, the nocturnal lifestyle, the endless supply of compliant doctors and enabling sycophants, the relentless pressure to perform. It was a factory perfectly designed to keep the product moving, even as the man producing it was falling apart. The city that gave him his triumphant second act also wrote his tragic third. It resurrected Elvis the icon, but it buried Elvis the man. The grueling Vegas schedule set the pattern for the rest of his short life, a pattern of performance, exhaustion, and chemical release that he continued on tour until his final days. He escaped the city, but he could not escape the prison it had built inside his soul. The velvet-lined showroom, which had once seemed like a throne room, was revealed for what it truly was all along: a comfortable, glittering, inescapable coffin. The story of Elvis in Las Vegas is not a simple tale of triumph or tragedy. It is a complex, heartbreaking story about the price of fame, the poison of routine, and the gilded cage of success. It is the story of how a king, in conquering a city made of light, found himself utterly and completely lost in the dark. If you were captivated by this hidden chapter of Elvis's life, subscribe to forever_Elvis_stories. There are countless more stories to tell, more shadows to explore, and more truths to uncover about the man behind the legend. Click subscribe and join us on the journey.